I'm Edwin Ellis. I'm a professor at the College of Education at the University of Alabama, and I'm also an affiliate research scientist at the University of Kansas Center for Research on Learning. This is part 2 of a series of videos about using visual tools for teaching the Common Core standards. You can download the actual PowerPoint presentation from graphicorganizers.com, and if you want to be able to study some of the examples that I'll be using during this video, that might be a good idea to download that. Just as a quick recap of some of the key ideas that we discussed in part 1, first of all, some of those Common Core standards get really complex, particularly as you move up in the grade levels. So for an example, delineate and evaluate the argument and specific claims in a text, assessing whether the reasoning is valid and the evidence is relevant and sufficient, identifies false statements and fallacious reasoning. So a common statement you hear from teachers when they see a standard like this is, okay, so how am I supposed to teach that? Or I really need to see how that's done. Well, the visual tools we're talking about here is really how to see just how that's done. Some of the key ideas or big ideas from part 1 is that the language arts standards for reading and writing really reflect categories of thinking and communication skills. Examples of those categories are things like summarizing and explaining key ideas, central messages and themes, or forming and expressing opinions, drawing and explaining inferences and conclusions, and so forth. Another big idea is there's really just an extensive research basis for using various visual tools to teach these skills, at least on a basic level. So for example, frames and webs and Venn diagrams and things like that can really be very effective when you're addressing these skills on a basic level. But as these standards get more complex and you move up in the grade levels, the basic visual tools really just don't cut it anymore. What you really need are discipline-specific visual tools that are specifically designed for teaching very specific complex standards. Another big idea is that it's really important to build competency using a series of increasingly complex visuals that correspond to increasingly complex Common Core standards. So part 2 of this series of videos is really about two things. First of all, we're going to take a look at some of the resources associated with the Genius visual tools, and we're also going to look at briefly some of the instructional routines that are associated with these resources. So just to recap, there are these categories of level critical thinking and communication skills, and they correspond to specific standards in the grade levels. So for example, if you take grade 4 and the literature standards there, under drawing and explaining inferences and conclusions, what I've done is develop some software that address these standards and provide visual tools specifically designed for teaching those. So for an example, under drawing inferences, there's a series of visuals that are specifically designed for teaching drawing inferences. Likewise, for identifying key messages and themes in literature, I've designed a series of visuals for that are developmentally appropriate for 4th grade level, and so forth and so on. So what we're going to do is, in a moment, just sort of take a look at that software to give you a sense of how it looks. So basically, there's a series of these, and so there's some for grade 4, and then for grade 5 that address the more complex standards at that level in grade 6, and they really go all the way up through 12th grade. So to take a look at that, I'm going to sort of pause from this PowerPoint, and I'm going to open up the software itself. Okay, so I'm going to click on this. This is actually the home page of the software. And so let me make this full screen, and I'm going to click on grade 4 for an example. Now let's say that I'm interested in this visual for being able to differentiate explicit from inferences about a character. And so I'm going to click on the word color, and what that will do is open up a document that's a color version of the visual. And so I'm going to make this a little bit larger so we can see the font. Now these are interactive, and so you can click on the text box, and let's say this is going to be a book about Paul Bunyan, and I misspelled that, B-O-Y-A-N, okay, Bunyan, B-U-N-Y-A-N, B-U-N-Y-A-N, okay, that got it, all right, and so of course the character is going to be Paul Bunyan, etc. Prompts on this particular one, words the author used to describe the character, and so G-I-G-A-N, that he was gigantic. Words that describe the character based on the book's pictures. Well, he had a red cap and so forth. And a little bit further down here, the author never tells the whole story. Based on what you know about similar persons or characters, note some other words the author could have used to describe this character. Well, that he's really clever. Now, the author didn't say he was really clever, but that might be true. In other words, what we're doing here is forming inferences about the character. Now I can save this into a folder called Paul Bunyan. Use this with kids and so forth. We'll talk a little bit about that later in terms of the instructional routines, but you get a sense of what I mean by these being interactive. In this case, I don't want to save these. Now, if I wanted to see an example of how a teacher used this particular one when teaching a lesson, I can click on these topics or titles right here. So for an example, I'm going to click on Paul Bunyan, and what opens up is an example of how a teacher used this particular visual when doing this character analysis of Paul Bunyan and inferences about the character. Likewise, if I wanted to see one about setting description web and click on Nutcracker, then that gives you an idea of how a teacher used that particular one. Whenever you see this, that simply means there's another page of these associated with describing characters. So I can click on 2, or I can go back to page 1 and so forth. Now this is for grade 4, and so if I really wanted to see some that are more advanced than grade 4, I can click on 5 and see some that are designed for 5th graders. And so you see these same categories here, but now these are really addressing the 5th grade standards. So for an example, forming inferences about what or how things shaped a character and inferences about that. I'm going to open this one. And so for an example, this one has specific prompts about making a decision. They're going to be addressing words that describe how the character treats others, or the character's view of him or herself, or what motivates the character, etc. And these were probably shaped by these setting or event features, and why I think so, etc. And again, so these are interactive. If I want to see how a teacher used that one, I can click on this topic to look at an example and so forth. And so you kind of get a sense of how this software works. Oh, if I click on BW, that simply stands for black and white, because so they're black line masters of these, and so forth. Now, the reason why we have both color and black and white versions of these is because when you're using these with things like a Promethean board or smart boards or LC projectors, it's really good to have the color, because obviously color is a lot more interesting than black and white and that sort of thing. What teachers often do when they're using these with smart boards is they'll do a lot of modeling and providing guided practice in how do you apply that particular visual tool and so forth. You can also these can also be used by students, and so for example in classroom computers, or you can even email them to students for home use in terms of homework assignments and that sort of thing. Now what's really important to understand about this material is that Genius is really not just about these various visual tools. Now it would seem like it because the visual tools themselves are so eye-catching and so forth, but there's a lot more going on than just the visual tools. It's also about really high engagement instructional routines for using them. And so what I've designed is a series of instructional routines that collectively I refer to as text to notes to writing instructional routines. And they're all based on this sort of singular research-based statement: is the more students write about what they read about, the more their reading comprehension, their writing, and their vocabulary improves. Likewise, the more they talk about what they read about, the same kind of thing. And so the instructional routines are built around getting kids to take notes, to write about what they read about, and things of that nature. And what's really important to understand about these instructional routines is the routines themselves are every bit as important as the visual tools are. And so this is not just about the visual tools, it's pairing the visual tools with these really powerful instructional routines. And so what I've designed is a series of these for how to use these before a lesson or at the beginning of the lesson to do things like provide advanced organizers, pre-teach vocabulary, preview the tool itself and things of that nature. Ways of using these to scaffold instruction during the heart of the lesson. And so there's a series of scaffolding kinds of routines. So you have teacher-guided instructional routines, fading into peer-mediated or peer support, partner routines and things of that nature, and eventually that fades to individual applications. So essentially what we're using is an I do it, we do it, y'all do it, as in peers do it together, fading into you do it kinds of gradual release instructional routines. There's also a series of these routines for how do you use these at the end of a lesson to do things like using essential questions that focus on the tools themselves in terms of how students perceive them, what they see as useful about them, how they can use them, and other kinds of reflective reviews, etc. Now, you might be interested in where you can find these resources. They're available on a website called graphicorganizers.com. And these are leveled, and so there are a group of these designed for the intermediate grades, a different group that really specifically designed for middle school, and then another group for high school. So for an example, if you look at the Common Core Standards, there's a series of these that all address reading and writing about literature across those various grade levels. And so there's software available for grades 3, 4, and 5 at the intermediate level that are discipline specific. In other words, all of these focus on literature. Another series that are literature-oriented that focus on grades 6, 7, and 8, and then on into high school and so forth. Likewise, at the intermediate level, we also have software specifically designed for teaching vocabulary, because that's so critical at these grade levels. And if you look at those reading and writing standards, they don't just address literature, they also address reading and writing about information. And so these are visual tools specifically designed to focus on key information, common topics like reading about a famous person or group of people or an important event or place or things of that nature. And so just as the visual tools for reading literature have specific prompts associated with character analysis, setting analysis, and plot sequence and so forth, the information-oriented visual tools have specific prompts on them that focus on what's essential to understand about a famous person or a place or an event, etc. As we move into middle school, we get more discipline specific. And so while you continue to have literature, you also have some that are specifically designed for focusing on project-based learning for grades 6, 7, and 8, some that are specifically designed for teaching history, and some specifically for science. Likewise, as we move into high school, we get very course specific. And so, for an example, in high school, we have, we're developing some that really focus on civics and econ types of courses, American history courses, biology, and we're also working on a geometry-based version of this. Now, right now, at this point in time, everything is kind of being developed simultaneously, and so there's a lot going on. Currently available, if you were actually to go online and order this stuff at this point in time, essentially the literature for the intermediate grades 3, 4, and 5 is available, as is the vocabulary, and the one for reading and writing about information. I anticipate by sometime this coming summer that the middle school literature version 6, 7, and 8 will be available, as will the project-based learning. And I also anticipate sometime in the fall, next fall, that there'll be a middle school version for history available and a high school version for literature. It's quite possible that these other things will also become available. It's just that there's so much going on at once. There's only so much I can do at once. And it's actually getting them to press and edited and so forth is rather a huge job. So kind of bear with me. It's all in process, and it will show up. So if you're interested in this kind of thing and you want to know more about it, there'll be a series of other videos that we'll be posting on YouTube. Feel free to contact me if you're interested in professional development. And also, if you're interested in participating in some of the research studies that we're doing, I'd be interested in hearing from you on that. So my email address is edwinellis1@gmail.com, and also feel free to call me if you'd like to chat about this. So the number is 205-394-5512.